This is Right On Radio, the voice of resistance and reconquest.
Welcome to Right On Radio. My name is Daniel Friberg, editor of righton.net, and I will be your host tonight together with my co-host, John Morgan. Glad to have you here, John.
Hello, nice to be here.
And joining us tonight as well, we have Swedish journalist and political analyst, Jonas Geer. Welcome, Jonas.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure as always.
The topic of today's program is the Identitarian Movement and the future of Europe. And to discuss this topic, joining us tonight, we have Alexander Markovics, who is one of the spokespeople for Identitäre Bewegung Österreich, which is the Austrian chapter of the Europe-wide Identitarian Movement, which is mostly known as Generation Identitaire or Generation Identity. Welcome to the show, Alexander.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
And to kind of start this off, would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background and how you kind of got into this political ideas and way of thinking?
I understand. Thank you for the word. When you're talking about the Identitarian movement in Austria, you have to keep in mind that we just started in 2012, actually 10 years after the movement was founded in France. And when you're asking about the motivation, why we started this movement in Austria in 2012 or bring it to Austria, one could simply quote your recently published book, The Real Right, The Right of the Real Right, where you say that actually the reason for the emergence of the new right was also the failure of the old right, and also the lack of militantism and the lack of new visions for the future. And therefore I founded, together with other militants from new rightist circles back in those days in Austria, the Identitarian Movement. Before, we already met and discussed books of the new right and thought about strategy and how we could change something in Austria. And then we came to the conclusion that it is not enough to just talk about books or strategy, but to do something.
Excellent. And that's 100% true. So how has your movement progressed since you started? I understand if you don't want to give us any exact details on membership numbers, but an approximate. I suppose it's been growing quite a lot, right?
Yes, absolutely. In the very beginning, we've been just a small group in Vienna in 2012, and we started with activism in Austria when the foreshadows of the current so-called refugee crisis reached Austria. There was occupation of the Austrian votive church, which is one of the big cultural sites of Vienna. It was occupied by left-wing extremists and economic refugees. And we then started a counter-occupation of this occupation. And this was our first breakthrough in Austria. It was in 2013. And from then on, we concentrated on subversive actions against the asylum industry and leftist and liberal politicians who supported this development. And in 2014, our next big milestone was our first manifestation in Vienna, because until this moment, patriotic manifestations in Austria were actually unknown. So we were able, despite some heavy clashes from the leftists, to march through Vienna with 200 people back in those days. And from there on, we simply continued to stage actions and manifestations. And our, until now, biggest success was our so-called Grenzhelfer-Kampagne. You could translate it as border helper campaign. So we decided, when we witnessed last summer left-wing extremists playing human traffickers and taking some so-called refugees from Budapest main train station to Austria with their cars. So we decided, okay, so we will help our government to erect the border, and started a campaign calling for putting up a border like they did in Hungary.
Excellent. Sounds like a very good initiative. And do we have Any follow-up questions from Jonas or John on that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, the Austrian right, if that's sort of, how you want to term it, has been it's been pretty sort of problematic, hasn't it, throughout the years? It's been you've had the Catholic right and you've had the FPO.
Yes.
You've so I mean, where do you sort of position yourself? And if you look at sort of all these questions, I know that this is a lot of questions at once. But if you look at the sort of questions of pan-Germanism and all of that, where do you sort of position yourself when it comes to those things?
Yeah, so as you've mentioned before, in Austria, you had once a very strong traditional Catholic right, which was also represented somehow still in the early 50s and 60s by the Austrian People's Party, the ÖVP.
Yeah.
But nearly the same. But they took nearly the same way as the Social Democrats in the whole of Europe.
As did the Catholic Church, to be honest, and I'm Catholic, so I mean it's not that, yeah.
So they also became subdued by liberalism. So they gave up their own ideals to become a more liberal party, like also did the socialists. So political Catholicism nearly died out in Austria since then. On the other hand, during the 80s, because Austria was actually a very oligarchic state after the end of World War II. So everything in politics was divided between the socialists and the People's Party. And there was an old joke going around in Austrian politics, which said, okay, when you want to get some work done, you need a socialist, one from the People Party, and someone who actually does the real work. So this was the process of politics went in Austria. And then in the 80s, the FPÖ emerged. The FPÖ actually became quite a big powerhouse under Jörg Haider, which you maybe know. And he became the symbol head of right-wing populism and actually also of patriotism. And he was also some kind of revisionist, actually in his early years. But he abandoned these positions. And yeah, when you're then talking about...
Well, I think he's one of the most brilliant European politicians that we've seen emerge, actually. So it's
in
simple as that.
Politics, he was really brilliant because he actually managed to destroy the Austrian two-party system when he took over the FPÖ. And yeah, so we Identitarians emerged at the point where there was already a strong FPÖ. But we said, okay, we need an Identitarian movement because there is no patriotic force on the streets. Because we said, okay, it's not just about politics, it's not about winning elections. Because in Austria, we also witnessed during government of the FPÖ from 2000 to 2005, we witnessed the biggest movement of mass migration until these days. And we also witnessed how the FPÖ actually abandoned their positions. So we thought, okay, we are actually in the dire need of a new right political party who's actually not into revisionism, which is not somehow reliant on a big political party, but who's actually politically independent and who's not only for the cultural preservation of Austria, but also for its ethnic preservation. So we actually thought about, we are in the dire need of a movement who's against the great replacement, as we call the current development going on all around Western Europe, which leads to the replacement of the indigenous European people by foreigners from the Middle East and Northern Africa.
Absolutely. But you don't really sort of hold any grudges, and this is an important point, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at, I mean, Austria being definitely a Central European country, a lot of other Central European countries have sort of problems with their neighbors. I mean, the Romanians have it with the Hungarians, and not to mention the Balkans, where there's still this animosity between the Serbs and the Croats and etc. But it's not really the same case, is it, with the Austrians?
No, absolutely not.
They don't really hold a grudge against neither the Germans nor the Hungarians nor any of their or the Czechs or any of the neighbors. Yeah.
No, as Identitarians, we are also a European movement. So we are actually accepting the fact that we have a common European civilization and that we can only preserve this civilization when we are working together. I think especially in these days during the refugee crisis, you can see that. So when we don't pull together, we will actually lose and will be doomed to become a Eurabia or something else.
No, absolutely. No, I agree completely.
And in Austria, and I think it's something special about the Identitarian movement that if you go to France, to Germany, or to Austria, to Italy, you will never find some old-fashioned chauvinistic concepts of nation or someone who's saying, okay, we have to get back South Tyrol or we have to get back the Alsace or...
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Because we've actually accepted the fact that the greatest endangerment for our identity nowadays is the great replacement and the development of globalization, of cultural globalization in the sense of Americanization especially. And it's not these old quarrels from the 19th century and from the 20th century, which concerned our nations back in those days. I think 2 world wars have taught us that it's not wise to fight European border wars. I think it's the least we need nowadays, and therefore we don't have any kind of grudges against the Slovenes, for example. So the conflict between the Austrians and the Slovenes in Carinthia, for example, has always been an issue, especially in the 80s with Al-Qaeda and things like that. So we don't have these grudges anymore, and you can see that, for example, on our last manifestation on the 20th of February, where we held a manifestation with 800 participants in Klagenfurt, in Carinthia, also with some 200 people from Slovenia. And this was actually a political event. When you had asked me 10 years ago, I and maybe also other people in the political spectrum in Austria would have told you, okay, this is impossible. Austrians and Slovenian patriots can't march on the same manifestations. But actually the refugee crisis and the Identitarian movement. And
that's great. And now this must be the sort of the future of Europe, mustn't it? And the future of the European peoples. So
sure, yeah. So I think it's our future to abandon these old struggles and fight together.
Well, I guess you don't conceive of your movement in the same way as a political party, though. Like I've always seen identitarianism as more of a meta-political activity. Would you agree? I mean, you're not actually looking to create a new party that will fight in elections. I guess your work is of a different nature.
Absolutely. Yeah. In Austria, we have been from the very beginning a meta-political movement because we also don't have any grudges against the FPÖ. But we recognized, okay, it's important that there's also a political force which is organizing manifestations or influencing the masses in meta-political issues to actually make a patriotic revolution in Austria possible. Like it, for example, happened in Hungary in 2006 and then in 2000.
Yes.
So actually you need a strong patriotic party in the parliament, and you also need a strong patriotic movement on the streets to actually change things in your country. And therefore, we don't have any grudge against political parties, but actually also support them when they are existing. Like, for example, back last week in Wiener Neustadt, we organized a manifestation together with the FPÖ there. So we are trying to join forces to fight the common enemy, and the common enemy is liberalism. The common enemy are those politicians who are actually enforcing the great replacement, and everything which anyone who can help us in the struggle is welcome to join our struggle and join our fight, and anyone who's opposing us is our enemy. So
That's excellent, and of course, it's been working quite well in Hungary, especially this past year. But one question that does come to my mind is, I think the concept of identitarianism and the idea of basing what we're doing on the notion of identity is a good one. It's been very successful, but it seems to me that the concept itself means many different things to many different people. So how would you, both personally and as an Austrian, how do you understand what identitarianism and identity mean?
Oh, sure. So this is a very good question. As we are called identitarians, we are actually concerning ourselves nearly every day with this question. So we've put up a theoretical model of what identity is actually. And for us, identity has two sides and three levels. So identity has an ethnic side and the cultural side. So the ethnic side is actually our heritage and our ethnicity. And the cultural side is actually the sum of language, history, traditions, which constitutes, and history, which actually constitutes people's culture. And then there are, on the other hand, the three levels of identity, which I think are very important for a new rightist view on identity. So we have the regional level. For example, my hometown, Vienna, is the first level of collective identity here in my country. And then we have the national level. So in my case, it would be Austria, and also furthermore, the German-speaking language space, since Austria has always been a part of this language space and this culture space. And then on the third hand, we have the civilizational level. So it's European civilization, which dates back to antiquity and at least exists since the Middle Ages. And yeah, therefore, we have a huge cultural and also ethnic heritage. And yeah, this is what we are actually fighting for.
I think that
to be honest, I would say that, on a civilizational level and a historical level, Vienna, or especially, but the Habsburg Empire as such was definitely one of the sort of main vehicles of European civilization, and has been throughout history. So it's not just been sort of a part of the German-speaking world. I mean, that's being very modest on your part as an Austrian. I think it was actually the center, or used to be.
That actually ties into something I was wondering about was how much importance you attach to the national level, because of course, Austria as a nation, as we understand it today, hasn't really been in existence for very long, and it seems to me that identitarianism would kind of transcend mere national boundaries or whatever, which tend to be quite arbitrary. But what's your view on that, on nationalism?
My view on nationalism is actually that I support the political level of the nation, but only in combination with the political level of the region and the civilization. So I think it's like a Russian Matryoshka doll, which consists of several dolls, but actually just one of these dolls wouldn't be anything without the other doll. So everything sticks together. And I think this perspective we have also in new rightist circles about nationalism and about the nation dates back to the pathological consequences of 19th century nationalism, where nationalism actually strived for actually suppressing or even destroying regional identities, and also to destroy the civilization where it was existing in, and said, okay, there's only the level of the nation. And for example, in Germany, every German who wasn't a good Prussian must have to become a good Prussian. And then you had somehow this mythic ideal of the proper Prussian civilian. And every German had to become a good Prussian, something like that. But we say, okay, the level of the nation is actually a good thing. We need something to unite all the different regions, but the nation can only exist when it actually allows, for example, the regions to exist and supports them, but not when it tries to destroy them. Because when a nation actually tries to destroy our regional identities, this leads to separatism.
No, and it's a very important point that, and this actually went on even in socialist Sweden up until the at least the late 1960s, where they tried to. There were these regions in Sweden where they still spoke versions of Finnish, but that was not allowed in schools. So, kids were actually being punished during their breaks talking Finnish.
Socialist Sweden was in modernist uniformization of the nation.
Yeah. So, No. So I mean, this has gone on all along. So it's a fairly recent discovery, we should say. That not discovery, but it's fairly recently that people are sort of recognizing that regional identities as such is something worthwhile keeping. Yeah.
Yeah, and I totally agree with Alexander's definition of identitarianism, because that is what I've always kind of seen as its biggest strength compared to regular ethno-nationalism, because it's multi-layered. It gives room for regional identities, national identities, civilizational identities. Which is a European identity, of course, and it's much more in line with how people think and where their loyalties lie. I mean, a person's identity is, of course, more than just a loyalty to the nation. It's to the region, to the hometown, and to Europe as such, of course. And this is very much also in line with many new right thinkers, which brings me to my next question. Which new right authors and thinkers would you say have been or is most influential for you personally and most important for the identitarian movement as such?
I think I could easily answer this question with simply looking into the catalog of the Actros publishing house.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Important new rightist thinkers have actually been published in your publishing house. And first Alain de Benoit, he's very important to us, and I think without him we wouldn't have founded the Identitarian Movement in Austria, at least that early. And furthermore, actually also Guillaume Fay is very important to us, because he also criticized the new right from a more pragmatic viewpoint. And except from those two thinkers, very important for us is actually also Alexander Dugin, which I saw for the first time in my life on one of your Identitarian Ideas conferences. I think it was in 2011 in Stockholm. Mm-hmm. Actually his idea of the fourth political theory was very impressive for me. And I think he and Alain de Benoit are actually nowadays two of the most important thinkers of the new right in Europe. And they are really brilliant. So especially in their critique of modernity and globalization. So they are somehow the living examples when someone says, new rightism is just about fascism in new clothes. You can say, oh no, it's totally different. You actually have a very good critique of modernity. And I think this is very important, that you don't criticize only the surface of certain developments, but that you go to the core of the things. And when we are talking about going to the core of the things, I can also only recommend Paul Edward Gottfried, who's also, I think, a very important thinker, especially his book Multiculturalism and the Politics of Guilt, which was published actually a long time ago. I think it was 10 years ago or something like that. And it was also a very important book for us, because in Austria and in Germany, when you're talking about patriotic politics or something like the radical right, you always had the debate, multiculturalism and mass migration in Austria and in Germany are only happening because of the end of World War II and because the war was lost, something like that. And actually, Paul Edward Gottfried pointed out, no, it's not just happening in Austria and in Germany. You maybe have the same pattern, but this is also happening in Sweden, which hasn't lost any world war, or in Great Britain or in France. So I think he's really a brilliant thinker. And I'm also currently reading War and Democracy, published by Actors. And it's actually a really, really good book and gives some insights into the thinking of Paul Edward Gottfried. He's really a great man.
And it's very nice to hear it. To hear that.
No, but that's another interesting point, actually. It's very clear that the intellectual climate in Germany is very much, how should we put it, mentally castrated since World War II. Would you say that is pretty much the same for Austria, or is it a little bit different? Or leading question once more, but still, yeah.
Yeah, Austria had quite a different development than Germany after World War II, because we were actually declared the first victims of Hitler in 1933 with the Declaration of Moscow. And in Austria, there has actually been nearly no discussion about our past and National Socialism until the 1980s with the presidency of Kurt Waldheim. And then nearly, the same politics of guilt, to use the phrase of Paul Edward.
Yeah, sure.
Again, in Austria, like, in Germany, for example. But as mentioned before, you also had the same thing in Great Britain and in France. So I think the situation of political correctness is even worse in Great Britain or in France or in Sweden with the different laws.
Yeah, in Sweden definitely, but for other reasons, but not on exactly the same topics as would be the case in, for example, Germany.
Sure, but when you put, for example, Jean Raspail and his book The Camp of Saints, he actually it was actually republished in German during the refugee crisis this summer. And it
really? I didn't know that. Okay.
Became a bestseller, really a bestseller.
No, it should be, because it's really prophetic.
Stores. Yes. And actually, Raspail wrote that nowadays he couldn't publish this book anymore in France because of the different opinion laws which have been enacted since then. So I think that the freedom of speech, for example, in France, is in a much more severe state than in Austria.
And also the intellectual climate, I would say, is in a much worse state in Sweden than in Germany or Austria or
any other country in the world. So, I mean, yeah.
So the thing about losing the Second World War and then the whole thing, the whole guilt complex because of the Holocaust and so forth is actually not that relevant, because
no, screw that. But I mean, the interesting thing is it sort of something that is tormenting the nation still, or the sort of national psyche?
Actually, I believe that it is tormenting Sweden much more than it is probably tormenting.
And oddly enough, the United States as well. Even though we were we were the ones liberating the camps at the end of the war, somehow we've also been implicated in this guilt over the Holocaust.
Every white nation is guilty and needs to pay amounts.
They started. I don't know if you remember, Daniel, but they started in the 90s with sort of huge campaigns in the establishment media saying that we hadn't done enough.
Yeah, I remember that.
Same in the U.S. Although I guess to the identitarians, like at least if you're like the French identitarians, Alexander, you kind of want to get past the legacy of the Second World War and concentrate on things as they are now.
Sure.
Yeah, which is logical. I mean, that is what we need to do. We need to move on and focus on the issues of today, which is one of the biggest strengths of the Identitarian movement, as I see it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think when you're fighting for the future of Europe, you for sure have to keep in mind that you have a past and that you have to know how you think about this past, and so that you don't make the same errors you did in the past, so that you can also create a sufficient present. But you also have to look in the future and say, okay, those things are behind us, and now we have to struggle for our future, because it's actually not written into stone that, for example, that in 100 years there will be Austrians in Austria or Swedish people in Sweden. So
no, it's not going to be in 10 years. I mean, this is the awful thing about it. It's getting really grim in Sweden. Sorry to interrupt.
We'll see about that. The battle is far from over. But
I know. I don't mean like that.
I just want to say that we have to look into the future so that we can save it.
Yeah, that's some very wise words, and we will discuss the future further after a 5-minute music break, where we will listen to one of my absolute favorites. It's a song by Identitäre Bewegung called La Nuit Revient. So see you after the break. Okay, and there we are back from the music break, and you just listened to Dernière Volonté with La Nuit Revient. I think the pronunciation was correct. Jonas, how did I do?
Yeah, no, I think it's right, yeah. Which means... what was the name of the title again?
La Nuit Revient.
Yeah, the night comes back.
Yeah, and the name of the band means the last will, or final will.
A wish, whatever, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, something like that. Anyways, so everyone is back and more energized than ever to continue this interesting discussion. And so let's talk more about the future of Europe. I mean, obviously, Western Europe is going towards. We're heading towards basically some sort of ethnical civil war, I would say, unless we can solve this migrant crisis very quickly in a peaceful political way. What is your take on this development, Alexander, and what do you see for the next 10 years of development in Western Europe?
Yeah, that's a good question. As mentioned before, I think that the current so-called refugee crisis is nothing else than an acceleration of the Great Replacement, which is already taking place in Europe since the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, exactly. Here. I mean, this is a very, very important point. So go on, Alexander. Go. Yeah.
And therefore, I think it is important to put the three identitarian demands for the solution of this crisis into practice, which actually means first the closure of the outer European borders, and as soon as this is not possible, the closure of the national borders. Then second, to help people affected by the wars in the Middle East and in Northern Africa, also by the destabilization of the Western nations, to help them in the region and to provide this help from Europe, and also to secure somehow refugee camps there in the region, so that those people don't have any reason to actually leave their homeland, and also to support these policies with a No Way campaign, like Australia did it. And third, to start the process of remigration, so to put all those people who entered our continent illegally back to their homeland. I think those are the three necessary steps to take when we want to prevent what you mentioned before, a civil war or a total chaos in Europe. I think what we are currently also witnessing is nothing else than the policies of chaos the United States and a lot of Western nations pursued in the Middle East and Northern Africa during the last 20, 30 years. The same politics are now practiced in Europe by our elites, at least when you're looking at Angela Merkel or some crazy politicians also in Sweden or in Austria. You actually have an agenda there wanting this influx of immigrants. And I think when we actually are able to pursue these three goals and enact them on a European-wide scale, I think we will still have some conflicts, but we will actually have a society not descending into civil war or something like that. But I think when we don't act in the next 5, 10, 15 years and do something about these developments happening now in Europe, and also then after we have solved this current crisis, to think about how we can change the demographic situation and finally halt the Great Replacement as such, then there will be in 20, 30 years, there will be no Europe anymore. So it's a very grim perspective, but I think we still have the possibility to do something against that. But we have to act now.
Absolutely, and that is why it's something that I'm personally very grateful for, to be able to live through these crucial and exciting times for Europe, for European civilization, and it's a great privilege for us to be able to participate in this in solving these problems. And I'm sure.
I suppose that's sort of a very kind of spiritual take on it. I personally find it's shit, actually, to sort of live through these times. I absolutely hate it. I would have loved to sort of see more decent times, but you know.
But you have to see it as an opportunity, Jonas. Not
yes, I do. Yeah,
pessimistic
but
way.
An opportunity for heroism, Jonas.
No. I mean,
embrace the hero.
I do understand that aspect of it, but no, but it's but it's a very important point. Once more, I mean, what's happening now is, and we can't stress that enough, I don't think, and especially to perhaps American listeners and I mean, people who don't live in Europe. This is what's going on now is not a refugee crisis. It's not. It's something that has to be administered from abroad. It's
administered from both abroad and from within Europe. It's a conscious. It's a conscious. I mean, I think the term "the Great Replacement" is the most accurate description of what is going on. And the Great Replacement.
Thanks to Renaud Camus.
Exactly, and. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence.
I've called it a mass invasion before, but you know, it's not an invasion because it's not that's not what's happening either. So yeah.
Well, the end result will be the same, though. It will be the occupation of Europe.
Well, it's pure semantics, but the term "the Great Replacement" is very accurate because not only are we being flooded by migrants from the third world, but we are also having policies put into place, at least in Western Europe, that actually prevents us from even maintaining our own reproductive level. I mean, we are decreasing, and that's consciously been done to us. I mean, by our elites. They want us to be replaced, basically, and I think that is one of the most important things for new people coming around to our way of thinking, which is a lot of people right now. I mean, we are experiencing a huge, massive growth of sympathy and support from the general populace and from people who like 10 years ago would never even consider getting involved in what we're doing because the problems are so obvious right now. But that is one of the basic things they need to understand, that this is no coincidence. This is not the result of so-called globalism or some sort of natural force or natural development at all.
No. And
I agree absolutely with you, Daniel. But I actually wanted that it prompted a question for me for Alexander, which is last summer during the height of the refugee crisis, I just remember, quote unquote refugee, we were treated to images of when the so-called migrants were let through to Austria, of people cheering and clapping for them and giving them water bottles and food, and I suspect that was some media manipulation. What has the mood in Austria actually been on the streets over the last year about this?
Over the last years? Oh yeah, that's a very interesting question, because as I said, when we started in 2012, we had this action of left-wing extremists to demand open borders with the occupation of the Votive Church in Vienna. And they were actually disrespected by the public. They were not supported in any way except from a very, very small left liberal elite in the just milieu of the Greens in Austria, for example. But this development radically changed in 2015 with the so-called refugee crisis. It was like in the German media. From one day to another, the public opinion was changed totally. And from there on, as you said, people were standing at the main train stations and handing over teddy bears to the refugees, the so-called ones,
yes.
And trying to shelter them at their homes, things like that. And then I think you had two very important events. one event was the massacre at Bataclan, for example, which somehow showed, okay, not all of the people coming to our country are actually economic refugees, but some of them are also terrorists. And this caused a huge shift in popular opinion in Austria, for example. But I think the most important event was the shame of Cologne, when more than 1,000 immigrants actually raped women at the main train station in Cologne. And the police simply stood beside there and didn't do anything. So there you could see that actually open borders leads to murder, leads to rape, and that actually those people who demanded open borders back in those days are actually also accountable for what happened. And this was also the reason why at every manifestation after Bataclan, after Cologne, we recalled these events and said, okay, we have to make these politicians who caused these troubles, we have to put them into part. We have to get rid of them. This is no longer tolerable. And I think these two events have been very important for the shift in the public opinion in Austria and in Germany. In Austria, as you know, last week there was an initiative caused by our Minister of Interior, Johanna Mikl-Leitner, who actually called together with some Balkan states for the closure of the Balkan route. And this is now causing actually great troubles in Berlin. But actually, Mikl-Leitner is a very good example how actually our manifestations and our demands also influence the Austrian policies, because already back in 2013, when the first boat refugees drowned in the Mediterranean, we demanded a phosphorus Europe, so that no one has to drown in the Mediterranean, but also that we stop this influx of mass migrants. And then back in these days, we demanded the phosphorus Europe, and everyone said, okay, this is fascist language, this is Nazi language, we will never do that. And then actually 2 years later, our Minister of Interior said, those who are against the phosphorus Europe actually never learned of history. And this was one of the great moments of success for us, when actually also the government began to take some of our positions and of our demands. And I think events like this one show that even a small group in a country like Austria, who's able to organize itself well and who somehow also is referring to topics which are actually really important for the population, can actually influence the situation. And yeah, I think this example of Mikl-Leitner shows how the situation in Austria has changed very strong. But we also still have to keep in mind that actually she is one of the politicians responsible for the situation. She's actually also must be accountable after she's leaving the government for that what happened in Bataclan, that what happened in Cologne, because actually most of these guys passed the Austrian border before they came to Germany or to Paris. And yeah, therefore, one also has to keep in mind that those politicians who caused this crisis and who are now trying to present themselves as the saviors in the darkest hour, I think we have to show the people that those are not our saviors, but that those are actually the people being accountable for that what happened here in Europe.
Exactly, and we have the same development in Sweden. I mean, suddenly the Swedish kind of mainstream establishment parties, which are pretty much all left-wing liberal from a European or historical context, are suddenly talking about the importance of border control and so forth.
No, but you've got the Christian Democrats and the sort of right-wing liberals or so-called and etc. So I mean, it's from basically all over the political spectrum, really, Daniel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was actually my point. So no contradiction there. But my main point here is that I totally agree with Alexander here that these people, these traitors, they should never be allowed to escape accountability for the destruction they brought on Europe and our countries, even if they are suddenly changing kind of their position regarding immigration, because it's kind of opportunistic for them to do so right now, because there is such a huge infrastructural collapse going on in Sweden, and the popular demand for some sort of halt of immigration is increasing drastically. So yeah, I totally believe in not letting these people get away with what they've done, and we should have some sort of People's Tribune or some sort of modern Nuremberg trials for all of these horrible.
Well, their buddies will probably help them out, even if right-wing parties come to power.
We will see about that. I will make.
But do you think, Alexander, that is sort of coming along in Austria? I mean, we can see in Sweden that there certainly has been this rather sudden, actually, sort of change in the tone of Swedish politicians and even establishment media to some extent. Now, I live in the UK since some 10 years, and you know, this is a mess of a nation which is just sort of boggling along anyhow. So I'm not sure we're going to see that here to the same extent, but you can see the same tendencies. But do you see a change of attitude, a change of tone from the politicians, from the media in Austria when it comes to mass migration and all those related problems?
You mean if there is a change of tone regarding topics in Austria? Yes, absolutely. So as mentioned before, in 2015, there was everything about welcome culture and refugees welcome. And yeah, nowadays, even our Minister of Interior is advertising posters in Afghanistan, which are actually telling the Afghan people that they don't have any chance of getting political asylum in Austria, and that they should stay in their country. So yeah.
So let me just ask you though, like, was it really the case even last summer at the height of the crisis that the majority of Austrians actually thought that this was a good or a necessary thing to let in these so-called migrants, or did people really believe that and then change their minds, or were people skeptical to begin with and the media just portrayed it in a certain way?
They were actually skeptical. Even a large portion of the Austrians was opposed these policies. But the problem as such was that there is a very deep sense for charity in the Austrian people, and for helping others who are endangered by war, something like that. And
yes, that's a very European trait.
Managed the semantic trick to portray all those immigrants as political refugees. The Austrians were, and yeah, this is somehow also very sad. They actually, believed them and said, okay, we are now ready to take up some refugees. And when the situation got worse and worse with every month, so with the beginning of summer, you had a lot of rapes in Austria. You also had some cases of murderous, things like that. And so the situation became grimmer with every day, especially also because the situation of the immigrants as such in camps like Treskirchen also became worse with every day. And then suddenly the average population got to know, okay, what it does actually mean when 90,000 people are now staying in Austria and becoming refugees. What will this mean for Austria? And yeah, since they are becoming confronted with the reality of the Austrian policies, they became more and more critic of the situation. And hopefully and gladly this led actually also to this change in acceptance of the current government policies. So it changed a lot in the last days. And just to point out another argument, if all this mass migration did not happen to Austria, a lot of women in Austria wouldn't have lost their honor. And I think also a lot more people in Austria wouldn't have beaten into the hospital or have been killed by so-called refugees. And I think, that actually our government is responsible for this, because it's the first duty of a government to guarantee the security of its own population. And as we have seen in various examples in Austria, but also in Bataclan in Paris and also in Cologne in Germany, actually our governments have...
No, it's just not in sort of certain cities, even though it's been perhaps extreme in those places. But this is, as you said before, this is something that has been going on more or less in Western Europe for the past 50 years. I mean, this is what people have to realize. That's how bad it is.
Well, but to try to see a silver lining in this, Alexander, have you seen an increase in support for Generation Identity in Austria as a result of this? I can't believe that you haven't, but have you seen that?
So our strategy with the very beginning of the crisis was because the Austrian government instituted a new law as a consequence of the crisis, because after it started, a lot of majors in the smaller towns said, okay, we won't take any refugees. So they instituted the so-called Durchgriffsrecht, which means that the central government in Austria can put refugees into every federal country they want to, and also to erect refugee camps in every federal country and every little village they want to. And that actually the majors can't do anything against that. And for sure, this leads to enormous increase in criminality, even in the small countries. And this was somehow a revolution for Austria, not only because it's very undemocratic to do something like that, because actually people should be able to decide who is becoming a part of the people and who's living together with them and who not. And so therefore, this caused a lot of unrest, especially in the smaller villages, who thought until this moment that asylum camps can only be erected in the bigger cities of Austria, like in Vienna or in Treskirchen. And therefore, we simply drove to these smaller villages, little cities, and staged their protests. And this led to an enormous increase of sympathizers and also of members of our movement and activists. And we could profit a lot out of the situation. And this also led to our biggest manifestation in our history at the border in Spielfeld with more than 1,000 participants, which was actually the biggest patriotic manifestation in Austria since the beginning of the Second Republic. So it helped us a lot.
Oh, that's excellent. I'm glad to hear that.
And as I said before, I mean, I think how cynical as it may sound, that this recent acceleration, because it is, as Alexander said before, it's actually just an acceleration of the great replacement that we've seen in the last year. It's not something entirely new. But I think the recent acceleration and all the problems that have come with it is basically a good thing for us, because it makes people realize. I mean, otherwise, it's like the story about boiling a frog and turning up the heat slowly and slowly until it suddenly dies without realizing it. Suddenly, the temperature is kind of turned up to the max, and people are terrified of what's going on, and they are kind of shocked into in such a way that it actually changes their views entirely on multiculturalism and immigration. And therefore, as tragic as they may be, the events at Cologne, and we've also had similar events in Sweden, are good.
Once more, Daniel, this has been going on for, and I don't want to be swearing on the podcast, but this has been going on. Okay, this has been going on for fucking 50 years at least. So seriously. So it might be a good thing actually if the powers that be become sort of overconfident. I mean, I'm not cheering in any way at any rape victim or what have you, but sometimes, it comes to a time when people really, really have to wake up, because they've managed to somehow shove their heads up their asses for years and years and years and years, and it's not doable anymore. It's not functioning. It's a horrible situation we're in.
Of course it is, but it's also sorry, Alexander, I will hand the word over to you in just a moment. But this is basically a good thing if you look at it on a grander scale, because it kind of gives us a massive increase in support, and it makes it possible for our parliamentary branches to kind of radicalize if they know what they're doing, and if the political will exists, these problems can be solved within a decade. People seem to think, or they've rather been tricked by the media, by the evil, liberal, lying media, mainstream media, that multiculturalism and mass immigration is something unavoidable. It can't be stopped, and people that have come to Europe are here to stay. We can't just move them anywhere because they are so rooted in every country and so forth, which is, of course, utter bullshit.
Bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. and if the political will exists, which is, I truly believe it will exist in the near future, thanks to these events and to the metapolitical successes of various actors. For example, the Identitarian Movement, what we're doing with Arctus, all the alternative media projects that are really prospering right now. It will be very easy to solve, because if we only remove all the financial incentives for people coming here, and if we implement a remigration program, we can even make it voluntarily and attached to some financial compensation for everyone who moves back. We'll easily get rid of like 30-40%, like immediately, and then we'll just implement stricter laws, which makes it possible to kind of expel anyone guilty of any crime. No
but
matter
Daniel,
why
not start with closing the bloody borders to begin with? That's step one, isn't it?
Of course, that's step one, of course, and I've never said anything.
No, I know
otherwise than that. But we, of course, we have to stop the flow. We have to close the borders. We have to get rid of all the financial incentives for people coming here.
Yeah.
And then we can start. It's basically when you're in a boat that has a huge hole in it and water is coming in. The first thing you do is to repair the hole. You kind of fill the hole before you start to get rid of the water already.
So very few of these people are actually fleeing for their lives. I mean, this is the thing.
Yeah.
So if you send out the signal that, okie doke, if you want to go out and risk your life for a better future in the UK or Germany or Sweden, if you want to risk that and take the risk of dying in the Mediterranean, then be our guest. Seriously. You know, what else?
Or dying in Europe. I mean,
yeah.
who knows? What
can
will
we
happen?
do? I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's horrible because it's actually. I mean, it's undermining the kind of spirit that we have still in Europe, which is that we want to sort of take care of people and we want to. But if this is being taken advantage of at this scale,
we need to get rid of it because they don't deserve our support anymore.
I think we should come back to the very important metaphor Daniel has put in about the frog in the boiling water, sitting in the boiling water. I think what our government actually did now is accelerating the temperature too quick, and therefore there are these reactions by the people that say, okay, we can't continue these policies anymore. We have to stop. And this is actually a very good point, because it's the point where, as Daniel has mentioned before, we can step in and make a political shift, a political turn out of the current crisis. And I think this crisis is not just one crisis which could lead to the end of the Great Replacement in Europe, but it could also put an end to liberalism as such in Europe. because as you see, for example,
you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, sure. But when you're looking, for example, at the Visegrad states in Eastern Europe, at Poland or Hungary, for example, what they are currently doing since the beginning of the so-called refugee crisis is exactly that they are really abandoning the so-called examples of Western democracies in Western Europe. And I think this is very important and can maybe be also be some kind of role model for Western European countries like Austria or Sweden, that we simply join their path and get not only rid of multiculturalism and the Great Replacement, but actually get rid of the whole wrong ideology which simply led us into this disaster.
I think that's a very important point that sometimes people overlook, is that I don't think anybody here in this discussion believes this, but I think there's some people who think, oh, we can just stop immigration and then continue on with our lives and with our countries as they were before. But obviously, the reason we got into this situation is due to some very deep inherent flaws in the system that we've set up in the West, and until that changes,
not just the system, I think, John, sorry to sort of intervene, but the mentality as well, and culture.
Yes,
exactly, and that is why I believe that how horrible it may sound, this might be a good thing for Europe, because it will, when we win and we get out of this mess and get rid of all the migrants, or pretty much almost all of them, in a very nice and humane way.
You think it's going to be a cleansing experience?
Yeah, of course, because we will come out of it much stronger, and we will. I mean, liberalism has been put to the test, and it has failed, and everyone can see it. So we need to get rid of it. I mean, we need to get rid of the root of the problem.
I hope to God you're right. I hope to God you're right.
So I am always right, Jonas. You should know this by now.
Yeah.
Anyways, regarding, what we're doing and the importance of metapolitics and everything, as I think most of our listeners are aware of, we are hosting an annual conference in Sweden called Identitarian Ideas. We've been doing so for 7 years now, and this will actually be the 8th conference this year, and it will take place. And actually, you who are listening to this are very privileged, because you're the first people to actually get this information, because we haven't announced it yet. But it will take place on Saturday, October 1st this year, and in Stockholm. And it will start at 1 o'clock as usual. And we'll post some more information very soon, but we'll have a huge variety of international speakers, and if you're lucky, maybe I will also give a speech. Let's see. Let's see about that. Anyways, Alexander, how would you feel about coming to this conference and giving a speech on behalf of the Identitarian movement?
I would feel very great about that. I've just to coordinate Saturday the 1st of October with our other recent activities, because the situation is, as we've mentioned before, getting hot in Austria and also in other European countries. So I think I can definitely tell you if I'm coming to the conference in the course of the upcoming week. Should be possible.
Excellent, and I hope that it's possible to at least receive some sort of delegation from.
Yeah, sure. That shouldn't be a problem at all. Yeah.
Excellent, and I will of course extend the same invitation to the German chapter of the Identitarian Movement, and as well as the French, of course, and everyone who's listening who's part of any Identitarian movement in Europe. Feel free to come as well. We would be happy to receive you, and I'm sure you will not regret it. And last year, the conference was a huge success. We had more visitors than ever before. We had better speakers than before, in some regards at least one regard. but seriously, it was a huge success, and everyone told me or told us afterwards that it was the best one yet. And I'm quite sure that the conference this year will be even better and even bigger.
It couldn't have been the best one yet, Daniel. I've been there before and I've spoken, and so.
Yeah, maybe that's why it was such a success last year. Anyways, we would be honored to have you and any friends of yours from the Identitarian Movement attending, of course.
Yeah, it's an honor for us to be invited. So.
Excellent. And the program is kind of drawing to a close.
I did have one other thing I wanted to.
Yeah. No pressure. I mean, just feel free to.
The EU is back in people's minds now with the UK's referendum coming up in June, and I heard earlier today that Switzerland has finally made official the fact that it's declining to apply for EU membership. So it seems like Euroscepticism is on the rise, and I'm just wondering, Alexander, as an identitarian, I know that to identitarians, cultivating European identity alongside one's regional and national identity is very important. How do you understand how this would come about in practice, politically speaking? I feel quite sure that you don't think the EU as it is now would be the way to go. How would you conceive of European unity along identitarian lines, as it were? The future?
Yeah. First, I would say one should start with the current European Union and how the European idea is completely misunderstood by those horrible bureaucrats in Brussels. I think what they are currently doing is the same thing like the nationalists did in the 19th century. So when the nationalists only run on rampage against the regional identity, the bureaucrats in Brussels are actually running on rampage against the regional identities and the national identities. And I think that the European Union in its current state is so far one of the most horrible things which happened to Europe since the end of World War II. So an identitarian conception of Europe would first and foremost respect the regional and national identities of the European people on the one hand, and on the other hand, and I think this is in the current situation the most important thing, would state that Europe is a civilization, that Europe consists of the diversity of its people, and therefore needs borders, needs closed borders, needs a protection of its civilization against mass migration and the great replacement. And therefore an identitarian Europe would be the total antithesis to the current state which Europe is in.
But you would like to see some sort of institution that would be in charge of this, just something other than the EU as it is now.
Yeah, sure, yeah. So I think the problem about the European Union is simply that it is a construct of liberalism and that it doesn't respect the identities of the European peoples. The very idea behind the European Union as an organization for European unity and for peace in Europe and for welfare, for prosperity is not bad as such, but how it was put into practice is completely horrible. So I think one of the greatest dangers of the current crisis and also of Euroscepticism in Europe as such is that it could also bury the idea of European unity with it when this very European Union fails. But I think we still have the possibility to somehow save the European thought and the idea of European unity. But we have to get rid of those bureaucrats in Brussels and put patriotic politicians not only in the parliaments in Stockholm and Vienna, but also in the European Commission in Brussels. And I think this will be a very difficult project, but we must somehow strive for it.
And actually,
with all due respect, sorry, Daniel, but this is an important point, because I know that this can be sort of very misconstrued. What Alexander,
I think mine is more important. But
okay,
no, go ahead, Jonas. If it's quick.
No. No, but seriously, when you criticize nationalism of or the nationalism of the say late 19th century, I completely agree with you. I don't think that was basically a good thing, but I would suspect that 99% of the listeners to this show would not understand what you're sort of getting at all. So that could need some kind of further explanation.
And I will provide that explanation
Right.
to save Alexander the trouble. Actually, you can fill in afterwards. But what I kind of envision for the future of the EU is kind of a continuation of the trend that we're already seeing in many European countries, where the real right, as I prefer to term it, kind of rises in a really rapid pace in the polls. And I think the upcoming EP election, I think it's in 2019, can be a huge milestone in the development, and a kind of a turnaround point for the European Union as such, because so far it's been run by liberals and socialists, and now some real conservatives, some real rightist parties are gaining more and more influence. And I wouldn't be surprised if 2019 EP election is the election where the power actually shifts from the liberals and the socialists to the more right-wing parties, which will make it possible for us to reform the EU, which is very much overdue. And I know that the EU is founded on kind of evil principles, hostile to European civilization.
Well, not necessarily. Not by all people. No.
No, I'm talking about the first kind of ideologues behind it, like Count Kodenov, Kalergi, and so forth, and this vision for the future of Europe, which is thoroughly evil and anti-European. But I still think that we can turn the European Union into a useful tool. We can turn it into something good. I believe in the reformation of the EU into a national conservative project, which will make it easier.
It might be able to become a Festung Europa.
Yeah, exactly, which is exactly what we need, because we are in a situation where we're seeing a clash of civilizations, and for that reason, it's important to maintain some sort of overarching institution for Europe. Organizing the defense of Europe and the border control and so forth. So over to you, Alexander. What's your take?
So I can only say the same things again like Daniel did. I also believe in the reformation of the European Union, especially when we are looking on the upcoming elections in bigger European countries. So I'm also very optimistic about the future of Europe. Maybe otherwise I wouldn't be fighting here. And also going on the streets and participating in the Identitarian Movement. And I think we are the future, and that we have actually to put all those politicians who caused this mess, we have to put them into court. And I think we will achieve a turn in the political events in Europe in the next 10-15 years latest. And then we can finally bring liberalism to the place where it belongs, on the cemetery of history.
I hope so.
I'm quite sure of that, and it makes me very happy to hear you agree on this as well, and also about the positive outlook, because I truly believe it's very important for us to maintain this positive outlook and really believe in our victory, because if we don't even believe in our own victory, we are doomed to failure. We have to be able to inspire people. Many people realizes the problems. What people need the most right now is hope, and our most important mission right now is to provide that hope for people. So I'm very happy about those kind of closing words from you, Alexander, because it seems that we are on the exact same level there, basically. And But before we kind of round off this show, would you mind giving some recommendations of where people can go to find out more about your movement and maybe some other websites or projects you want to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, for sure. So, as mentioned before, so the Identitarian Movement exists not only in France, but also in Austria, in Germany, Italy, other countries. So if you're living in a country where there exists a branch of the Identitarian Movement, join them, visit them. I think it's one of the biggest and best experiences you can make in your life, joining some compatriots, fighting for a common European cause on a European level. I think it will really give you a better sight on the events happening in Europe. It will give you some optimism, and it will also give you a real possibility to change something, even when it's only at the level of your home country, of your hometown. It will definitely show you that you, as a person, can change something. And if you are not willing to join a movement, then join a political party, like in Sweden, the Sweden Democrats or something, and look for a possibility to change the things for your people, make a future for Europe possible.
Excellent, and thank you very much for joining us today, Alexander. And we'll post all the relevant links when we publish the podcast to your websites and so forth, so everyone can kind of check out them from righton.net. But anyways, thank you everyone who's been listening, and thank you Alexander, and thank you Jonas and John for participating.
Thank you for the invitation, Daniel.
And have a nice evening.
You too.
Good night, everyone.
Take care.
Nice
Bye.
evening.